As time has passed, game worlds have only gotten bigger and bigger, not only in volume of content, but in the actual size of the worlds themselves, usually pushing the hardware they run on to its limits to achieve this. And there's no greater example of this than The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. This game is massive, with the world of Breath of the Wild completely overhauled with new content and the addition of the Sky Islands and depths. There's so much content in this game, I don't know if I'll ever be able to experience it all. And all the new abilities add a ton of fun ways to interact with the world. Like Ultra Hand, which is one of the biggest reasons why this game is so much fun. You can use it to build anything from weapons to vehicles to traps, even harvest resources, and of course, solve puzzles. On top of that, Tears of the Kingdom has one of the best graphical styles in all of gaming, and it's personally my favorite part of the game. Even now, it's nice to just walk around and enjoy how nice this game looks. Ever since playing Breath of the Wild and seeing this style for the first time, I've always wanted to make something that looks that good. Now, I've worked on various different game projects in the past, and the style that I used the most was a style more similar to Minecraft. Now, while I still really like this style, the low resolution of the textures and meshes really kept me from creating the level of detail that I wanted. So eventually, I decided to try making something that looks at least similar to Tears of the Kingdom instead. Now, of course, there's no way that I can make it exactly like Tears of the Kingdom, and I don't want to directly copy it anyways, but I want to make something that's at least inspired by it. Now, with this, what kind of game am I going to make? Obviously, I don't have the resources that Nintendo does. It would take me decades to create something that even resembled Tears of the Kingdom. So instead, I'm going to be using my favorite game genre, survival games. Playing Ark, Valheim, Terraria, and Minecraft, and especially modded Minecraft, were some of the most fun experiences I've ever had gaming, and I've always wanted to be able to create something that's that fun. Now, of course, creating a game with the style of Tears of the Kingdom, the gameplay of Ark, Valheim, Terraria, and Minecraft is not going to be easy. But fortunately, with all the systems I've already worked on, like crafting, building, items, and combat, a lot of the work is already done. Still, even with this, I have yet to make the most important part of the game, the world itself. I can't make a survival game if there's no world to play it in, so that's what I'll start with. First, I'll start with the terrain. For this, I'll be using a system similar to Valheim. I'll just displace the vertices of a mesh with noise maps to create hills and valleys. I'm also using a quad tree chunk system, which lowers the detail of the terrain chunks as they get more distant. This way, I can render miles of terrain without melting your PC. And because the terrain chunks will be rendered in as the player moves around, it allows for infinitely generating worlds like in Minecraft. Now that we have a terrain mesh, we need a material to apply to it to make it look like terrain. Now, the terrain material needs to respond to the biome system. For my biome system, I'll be using Perlin noise to generate a temperature and humidity map. This will control what types of plants, animals, and structures spawn at any point on the terrain. With this system, I pretty much have the freedom to create any type of biome I want, like a hot and dry desert, a cold and dry tundra, a cold and humid spruce forest, and a warm and humid jungle. Now, for the terrain material, I need to create 5 different textures: grass, sand, dirt, snow, and rock. Now, for a lot of these, I'm going to be using a texture map system. This is where I use a black and white texture to control different properties of a material, like the brightness, color, or saturation. This is something similar to what Minecraft does to allow different colored grass depending on the biome. To create these, I'll use a number of different materials in Blender that stack noise layers on top of each other until I get the look that I want. Now, that takes care of the color, but there's another very important part of creating materials in any game engine: normal maps. This is what controls how light interacts with the surface and can add a lot of extra detail without costing too much performance. I'm going to be creating a very basic bumpy looking map to use for the snow, grass, and dirt, and then I'll create a much more jagged looking one for the rock. Now that I have the textures completed, I can use the biome system from earlier to blend between each of these textures based off of the temperature and humidity that they belong in. For the rock texture, I'll just be applying this to any part of the terrain that's too steep. I'm also going to make any part of the terrain below a certain point dirt to create a water line. Now, with a water line, we need some actual water. To do this, I just used a noise map in Blender to create a normal map that looks like small waves. Then I layered this over itself, moving in a few different directions to create a water effect. Then I just made this into a translucent material that gets darker the deeper the water is. Now, I do want to improve this more in the future by adding actual physical waves like there is in Valheim, but I think this looks nice enough for now. Next, I want to add some atmospherics like clouds and fog. For the clouds, I just have a huge sky dome with a cloud material applied to it. For the cloud material, I just have a few layers of Perlin noise that control the opacity of the clouds. I also made it so that the clouds respond to the sunlight color. and make some portions of the clouds darker to make it more realistic. For the fog, I'll make it similar to the fog in Valheim. I just have a particle system spawn these giant particles with a material similar to the one that I use for the clouds. I also noticed how Valheim and Tears of the Kingdom both darken up the landscape a little bit as you get further away from it, and this just helps make the atmosphere a little bit more believable, so I'll just use Unreal's default fog system to get that effect. Now, with the atmosphere looking better, we need to actually add stuff to the terrain. First, I want to add some grass. The grass in Tears of the Kingdom is easily my favorite grass in any game. One of the reasons it looks so good is because they render a separate mesh for each individual blade of grass. To do this, I'll just create a diamond shape in Blender and stretch it upwards until it's the right height. Then in Unreal, I just apply a material that gives it its grass color and some vertex displacement for the wind. I'm also using a procedural system that places grass as the player moves around. I also want the color and height of the grass to match the biome that it's in. To do this, I'll make the grass get less saturated and shorter as the humidity goes down. I'll also just remove grass that's in desert or really snowy areas. And I'll make any grass in snowy areas turn white. I also want to be able to render grass that's really far away, so I'll use a card mesh with a texture that has multiple blades of grass on it instead of just one. A lot of games do this to improve performance, and you can especially notice it here in Tears of the Kingdom. I also like this secondary layer of short low grass, so I'll add some as well. This is basically the same as the other grass, but just one triangle instead of a diamond shape. Now I need to add some more variety because just grass is pretty boring. So I went into Blender and modeled a few different plants that I could render into textures. Then I just made the actual meshes that I would need and imported them into Unreal. Then I just used the temperature and humidity maps to disperse them according to their own biome. Now, of course, we're going to need some trees. I'll start with the tree bark textures. For this, I'm just going to use a few layers of noise to create this spruce bark material. Then I use a similar setup with some green added to it to create a more mossy looking oak bark. Then I have a special setup with Voronoi noise and a few other layers of noise so that I can get that unique birch bark look. For the oak leaves, I just modeled a bunch of individual leaves and then rendered these into a texture. For the birch leaves, I did basically the same thing but just lowered the leaf density. For the pine needles, I just modeled the individual needles and then put those in a bunch and kept bunching that up until it looked nice. Then I just created the tree models themselves similar to how I did the other plants. I also wanted a cactus for the desert areas, so I just used a cylinder to create this basic cactus shape in Blender. And for the texturing, I just made it green with it getting brighter around the outside edges. With the trees now in Unreal Engine, I'm going to add some wind to the leaves the same way I did with the grass. I'm also going to add some random variation to the color of the leaves for the birch trees and oak trees. With all these added, the world is looking way better. Next, I want to add some rocks. First, I'll model a few different sizes of rock meshes. Then I'm going to use the rock texture from the terrain material as a base to create these mossy rock and sandstone materials. Then I can just scatter these along the terrain using the humidity and temperature to control where they end up. The last thing I want to add is some kind of structure. In mods like Hexit and RLCraft, everywhere you go there are tons of dungeons to be explored. And without them, the terrain just looks kind of blank. For this I thought I'd recreate one of my favorite dungeons of all time, the Battle Tower. First, I created a reference version out of cubes so that I could get it one-to-one with the real thing. Then I used that as a base to make a more simplified version of it, then created some windows in this and stacked it on top of itself until it was the right height. Then I added some extra details around the corners and edges to make it look more polished. Now I'm also going to need a material to apply to this, so I'm going to make a basic brick texture in Blender. Now I can put these both into Unreal Engine. Now this definitely isn't gameplay ready, but that's fine. It's mostly meant to be a visual placeholder right now, and something to just add some interest to the world. Anyway, I'm probably going to have to overhaul the entire thing to account for the different movement and gameplay of my game versus Minecraft, so I'm not too concerned with it. Now, with the tower in Unreal Engine, I can add it to the world generation. With this, the world definitely looks more interesting. Now, it's all still pretty basic, but I think that this is a good first iteration for the world. There's of course plenty of things I want to change, like making the cloud system actually interactable so that you can walk through the clouds, or improving the water as I mentioned earlier, and redoing the sky system to support day and night cycles, as well as just improve the look of it. Unreal Sky system is pretty realistic, but when looking at the more stylized sky of Tears of the Kingdom, it just doesn't compare. Still, I think this is a good place to start. This is most of what I have done right now, but I am working on a few other things, like a character model. Because I've barely worked on it though, it looks really bad right now, and I tried doing a test animation for it, and that just looks even worse, so I'll have to get back to that later. I also have someone else working on some modeling and texturing on a number of different things like tools, weapons, plants, and even a skeleton model, because every good game needs a skeleton enemy, and that'll definitely help speed up the process. That's about all I have for now though. I'll keep making updates on my progress as soon as I can, and hopefully I can get a playable version out as quickly as possible. Thanks for watching. See ya.